Top of the morning to you all. It's a wonderful, program we have ahead of us here. I'm just so grateful to all of you for joining us, and so grateful indeed to our wonderful speaker, Edith Dorsen, for joining us. So we're really privileged to have her with us today, and in such an important, initiative within the VC ecosystem that she's really led the way on, and making it a more inclusive place for folks, and taking advantage of untapped opportunities that some VCs who are stuck in their old bad ways are missing out on. So kudos to you. I just want to, before we launch into things a little more, thank those who've made this event possible. The city of Burbank, is hosting this event under the auspices of their wonderful economic development team. We've had the privilege here at TechFire to work with them for so many events since 2015, and it's just it's an incredible city. Obviously, we all know it as the headquarters of Walt Disney Company and Warner Brothers and everything. So certainly, if you're in the entertainment and side of the tech world, it's incredible. But we've just seen over the past 5+ years how it's just taken off in a whole broad spectrum of ways, and that's really manifested this year with the new Future of Work Accelerator Studio partnership with Untapped Ventures, which is awesome to see happening. If you haven't heard about them, check out the city's website, EconDev Burbank, and read more about the accelerator at Untapped.ventures. We're going to be having, for those who aren't in the accelerator, a pitch fest coming up in April. Watch your emails. We want to have as many female founders for sure, and those with inclusive teams, particularly encouraged to apply, but obviously everyone. It's designed for those who maybe didn't fit in the Future of Work Accelerator, who are in other awesome industries. Love to have you in there. We had, way too many people that we could fit in our past couple pitch fests. So really looking forward to that. Watch your emails for the invites and ways to pitch. And of course, once you get going and you grow big, you'll have to come back and try to pitch when you're a little later stage, Women's VC Fund 2 here. But we're going to learn more about it here. I just want to also, before we do jump in though, thank the Burbank Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us as well. They have a wonderful leadership team. We jumped on a Zoom call, last month, I guess it was, to think about ways to work together. And we're just so privileged. They're new team, doing great work to work with you here and support the ecosystem, the business community there. So thank you very much indeed to all who may not be on screen, but are really the true ones making this event possible. So really, really grateful. So, we started Burbank Tech Talks, 5 years ago because we wanted to uplift founders, help them not make the same mistakes, connect with VCs. And I had seen the power of these sort of fireside chat events to get get opportunities. I'd gotten some money for a previous project, so can't promise that our speaker will fund you in the audience here. Won't make any promises on your behalf, but hopefully you'll learn some tips on how you might get funded. We're just really lucky. Thank you so much for making the time here. And, Edie Dorsen, as all of you have read her bio, she's co-founder and managing partner of Women's VC Fund 2. They do focus on historically the, California and the West, Pacific Northwest. Of course, during the pandemic, we've all seen geography melt away, and broader folks too. But I hope you will have a particular focus on Burbank startups there here, which definitely fits in the California mandate. They've already got some incredible portfolio companies, already. But I think it's a really interesting story about how the fund came together. We're going to get into that shortly here. Just to drop a hint to the story, it does involve the alumni days. So always go, once the pandemic's over, back to your alumni reunions, all of you in the audience. You never know what will happen. And so we'll get to that in a minute. But Edie, I know she comes from the Wall Street world too. She's an expert in the finance side of things. MBA from Harvard Business School and MPA from the Kennedy School of Government, and just really doing great things to make the VC and startup world a better place. So without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. I just wish I loved, as before we got started, I shared with you and Marissa, David, that we really like to be in Southern California in March, but this is the next best thing.
Well, looking forward to having you fly down to Burbank Airport and and join us here in person soon. But tell us that story. I went people's apps on a little bit. How did the genesis of the first fund come together?
Surely. Fortuitously, we were literally headed into a reunion weekend, my classmate and I at Harvard Business School, and we stumbled on the data that showed the paucity of venture capital going to female founders. And it's a number, of course, that's been repeated time and time again in recent years, but back at this point, which was about 10 years ago, nobody was paying attention to it. And it was quite astounding to us, because as we looked around our own networks, we saw lots of very capable professional women and what we thought to be a significant number of venture-worthy women entrepreneurs. So we took the occasion, scrambled, but it was a unique opportunity to invite very limited number, 15 women, to a round table. And at that point in time, even this was not on the considered a priority for the business schools. So they gave us 8:30 on a Saturday morning after late night parties the night before. But we were entrepreneurs of sorts, and so we took that time. And as luck would have it, it was pouring in Cambridge that morning. But shortly, by 10 to 9, we had twice as many folks in the room as we had invited. So.
Wow.
We spent the time talking about, did we think there was enough of a pipeline? Because our interest then, continuing through the present, has always been still to create a returns-focused venture capital fund, just like virtually all venture capital funds. This was not intended to be an impact or double bottom line at all. So we focused on, was the pipeline sufficient? What did we think the obstacles were? And moreover, was there something this core group might do about it? And at that point in time, there was very little data that supported that diversity, in fact, builds stronger companies that perform better. But the little bit we seized upon the little bit that there was, and we went out and fairly quickly validated that there was a large and growing pipeline, and really concluded that in the not too distant future, we were going to reach, that we would reach an inflection point in the numbers of venture-worthy women entrepreneurs, that historically have been perhaps overlooked and undervalued by the traditional VC industry. So it was, I completely empathize with founders raising their first money, because we decided that we had to put a litmus test and see if we could raise what would be the equivalent of seed capital. And it was without a doubt the toughest money I have ever raised. And, have raised money for public companies, private companies, philanthropic nonprofits. But slowly we did. But it was a very slow go. I mean, we met tremendous amount of skepticism across the board from the traditional industry, who thought there was not enough of a pipeline, until through to the present, some have still argued that, although I think it's beginning to change. And on the other side, in terms of investors, we had to do a lot of educating the market. So some of our earliest investors were experienced VC, participated as limited partners in VC funds or as angel investors. But many professional women had not had that opportunity before. So we had to do a tremendous amount of market education. And slowly did. And happy to say that, when you're starting something new, you don't have as much data as you'd like. You're out on a limb, you're taking a risk. And but I think, and our focus, I should say, from the start was not pure startups. We felt there was more, the greatest challenge for female founders was at what's become known as the Series A stage, which for us, we've defined as those that have raised several million dollars, have developed their core technology or product and are demonstrating some real market traction. And we've seen actually very significant improvement, we believe, at the angel seed stage for female founders, and somewhat in the private equity. We can come back to why the difference is, but that remained, that certainly was at the time we started out, and we still think Series A and B is, so that's what we focused on from the very beginning.
So you've had obviously a lot of experience in your career doing business development for children's television workshop, Physicians Online, others. So you obviously knew how to sell, do partnerships, really well. It really required a lot more of an entrepreneurial mindset than some VCs who might have just come from the VC world, who unfortunately weren't facing institutional LP limited partners, those who invest in VC funds, headwinds and such. It seems like there's still a lot of change that needs to be done, in the VC ecosystem, which we're fully rooting for, to make it a more inclusive place. But you live that, make the change you wish to see in the world motto. And some say, Fund 2 is even harder than Fund 1. What was it like, getting Fund 2 together here?
Yeah, that's a very good point. The challenge in the VC world is, with few exceptions, you don't really know how it performs till you're 10 or 12 years out, because, that's unless you've had a hit early. And that's more often the exception than the rule. So that's why going out for Fund 2, in some ways, you got to sort of start to demonstrate. And we were able to show that we had invested in some terrific companies, by way of a couple of examples. Invoice Pay, which is in the fintech space, in the B2B payments.
Big name.
We were the first institutional investor, and within 5 years, and I think by the time we were going out to the second fund, that was sort of beginning to happen. But within 5 years, they had achieved a tremendous liquidity event, really handsomely rewarding a team that absolutely deserved it, their investors and our investors. Similarly, on the other end of the spectrum, because it's all about getting the right deal flow. I mean, that's what, venture capitalists who advised me early on, and I'm not sure that I fully appreciated that early on, but I've come to appreciate it. So, another company we were thrilled to be able to invest in is Newzella. Very different situation. We came in at the Series B, Kleiner was leading it. They didn't need our money. It was oversubscribed. But we made the case, and the CEO and other ed tech investors believed that we would really add, the Women's Venture Capital Fund would add value as part of their cap table. And in fairly short order, I think we did some things that some of the other big VC funds haven't done. So that's a bit of the challenge, because when you go out for the second fundings, you got to begin to sort of show results. And certainly today we can. Happy to add, there was an article in the New York Times this morning on Newzella, which raised a Series B back within earlier this year, but it's just been sort of publicly announced more recently. And they're in a clear fight to sort of reclaim some of that money that historically has gone to textbook publishers that for the most part are sort of antiquated and not aligned in engaging today's digital native students in the same way.
That's amazing. Before we jump in a little more, I want to ask you more about your portfolio companies in a minute, but just jumping back, thinking broadly, about the state of the ecosystem right now. Here we are in 2021 in March, where you're out from the start of the pandemic. When we were in last March, last year, initially we were afraid, VC would shut down, everything, the ecosystem would, and then boom, obviously everything shifted to digital and things just went wild. What's your prognosis for 2021, the rest of 2021? Here in tech, and what are you most interested in sector-wise?
Yeah. So look, feeling a lot better today than we were, the second half of March last year, where, I think we were all, no question, sort of stunned by what,
Yeah.
the paralysis that set in. So I'm feeling pretty good. I think the markets are sort of demonstrating that, particularly in the second half of the year. God willing, and everybody should get vaccinated or tell their neighbors and families, because I think that's the most pivotal thing that can impact the durability and recovery is that vaccination. But I'm hopeful that that will happen without us experiencing, God forbid, a third wave here. So really exciting. Look, I think for the most part, have there been casualties, headwinds to this? Absolutely. And when you get any venture capitalist in a private room, they will tell you who those are. But I will say equally that I think for the most part, companies that have gotten through this pandemic period are emerging stronger. It's amazing when you have to ruthlessly prioritize, and you have to sort of slow down and stop and think how you often emerge sort of stronger and better. And I think for the most part, our entrepreneurs have used the time very wisely and have worked closely with experienced investors and boards and senior teams. And, I think with one or two exceptions across, our two funds and portfolios, that our companies are stronger than ever. So look, what particularly as a relatively modest sized fund, it's really verticals to us that really excites us, because I think there's still, how we conduct business, how we entertain, how we, shop, all of that, how we message and communicate, all of that's been fundamentally, transformed in recent years. But there's still whole industries that have verticals, really, that have barely been touched. Ed tech, I would say, is still one of them, particularly at the K through 12. And we were probably among the first generalist funds that focused on that space, in part because I have had some background, although by no means am, an educational expert, but I have a great deal of interest and have had some professional experience in that sector. I think we have a long way to go to figure out to really harness the power of technology to transform and achieve better outcomes at the K through 12, but I think we're on the cusp of that happening. But I would also call out, and a newer area of interest for me that our team has started to think about, is in the food tech space, which I think is, great changes await us. Clearly getting grocery deliveries at home has been radically introduced within a compressed period of time. But barring that, there's been very little about the food system that has changed, with a great deal of potential, I think, to make foods healthier, to produce them more efficiently in a sustainable fashion, and get them to the end consumer in a much more efficient way. So I know that we're going to, particularly as we move into Fund 3, gonna put some more mind share against that. And probably no surprise, I expect lots of women to be at the forefront of that. And then I would also call out women's health, which has been a tremendously underinvested area. And there are beginning to be, certainly that's been called out with increasing frequency. There's some funds that are specifically focused on that, but I think it needs a lot more capital. And we're talking about a whole gamut of problems and challenges in women's health, everything from, on the one side, fertility, sexual health, all the way to sort of menopause and postmenopausal. And, we think there's great opportunity and hope that a comparable amount of capital that's been directed toward issues that are specifically related to men will now be channeled toward women who, I think, care a lot about their bodies and care a lot about their health, but they need the tools and tools to be able to take care of themselves and their families.
That really speaks to the untapped opportunities because of the bias and the demographics of the VC industry. What is your sense? Are we anywhere near overcoming the headwinds in the industry, or what's your read of the direction?
Yeah, look, I think it's getting better. I think there's no question it's getting better. I think it started there started to be a little more awareness back. I can't remember now what year it was when there was a well-publicized trial.
Minor Perkins, yeah.
That was not the best model case for and a lot of, but it started to raise awareness. So when I would go in and meet with established venture capital funds, they would raise the subject for me and talk about it. And then I think it went into a lull after that. And I think events of the last couple of years have brought it back, both from a gender perspective as well as a racial perspective. Capital access, in some ways, I mean, some have argued it's the civil rights issue of our time. And,
Totally.
there's no question that, anyway, so look, I think still there's much more talk than there is action. And, so what's going to make a change? I think in part having women as investors, as senior, at the table as partners in some of the big established funds who are part of legitimately doing diligence and deciding who should get the scarce capital. It's been shown time and time again that when women are part of the senior leadership, making the investment decisions, guess what? A higher percentage of capital goes to female founders. What we should say is, notwithstanding our name, we've always been interested in gender diverse teams. In point of fact, just as we would never invest in an all male team, we prefer strongly not to invest in an all female senior team.
Interesting.
So having that senior leadership and it in a bona fide investment capacity, not the CFO or not the head of marketing or PR or investor relations, because that's where the rubber meets the road. We also believe, though, that the real power to transform the industry, rests with the institutions who provide 80 to 90% of the capital in the venture capital industry. So what do I mean by that? I mean the foundations and endowments and family offices and pension funds who it's their capital that the venture capital firms are investing in. So if they start asking the questions, if they start monitoring, when they meet with their venture capital funds for performance, annual performance reviews, what are they saying? What gender diverse, racially diverse companies they're evaluating? Where are they putting that capital? They start asking the questions and monitoring. I don't think they should dictate, and I'm loath to recommend any specific targets, but I think there's a tremendous unexercised potential for limited partners to start asking the questions, listening to the responses, and strongly encouraging these firms to open up their networks, because it is no longer a question of pipeline. It is absolutely.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. I'm sorry. I did you really inspired me on that point. I mean, you think about how like college campuses, students had maybe led protests to get them to divest from fossil fuels or tobacco companies or whatever. But wouldn't it be helpful to have student groups, pressuring them to invest in more, in more diverse investments, in your fund 3 for sure, but other funds, because that outside pressure can help. These limited partners can be very conservative and traditional and locked into their ways because they're investing the pensions of the employees. I mean, they don't want to mess up. It's very important, but sometimes to maybe get out of their stuck and stayed ways, they could benefit from.
Well, and there's great precedence for it. So yes, can the students sort of kind of demand their college, endowments? But also, I would say, if you look at, there was a climate action initiative a few years ago that was started, which is really probably a better template for what we're talking about, because they were in fact investors who were sort of demanding that sort of corporations, which are the equivalent of venture capital funds, really start to expose data, be much more transparent, and share with them specific actions they are taking to sort of improve their their climate, to demonstrate real progress on the climate and environmental front. So this precedent for institutions, and I would say the pressure, if you would, positive pressure, needs to start with the trustees of these organizations, the boards of directors, the chief investment officers, and the CEOs. So I think, but we got to start going beyond talk, because, there's just such a great swath of talent here. To ignore it, but we need to get beyond our, reach out and sort of change the paradigm. But I think we all have a part to play. Left to their own devices, I don't think venture capital funds they're for the most part small partnerships. But if their key investors, which are the backbone of the capital, are starting asking these questions and monitoring, I think it will help force change in a way that significantly accelerate it, quite candidly.
So we've talked about the big picture here with what needs to happen there structurally. Let's get down into the weeds now. Let's say you're someone in the audience here who, is a very early stage founder, frankly, too early stage to pitch you successfully, at least yet. What should they be thinking about? Now, I'll say, they should be thinking about locating in Burbank, because the city's got no city income tax, no gross receipt tax, amazing team. You got Mary, Marissa, Erica, they're there to help you. And once you can get your office going again, they've got the biggest IKEA, I don't know, maybe in the US. You can spend those ramen noodle dollars wisely, as they say. But seriously, do you advise, if, say, someone in the audience here is, and we are going to get to questions later, start putting your questions, everyone. Click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Start typing them in. We'll get them in a little bit. But if you're super early stage at this point in the pandemic recovery here, do you advise? It's harder. On the one hand, we're still not back to normal, but on the other hand, we've seen tech sort of take off so much. Do you advise people to really, really just go for it, to join an accelerator, to get going on their own? What mistakes maybe are you seeing people make really early stage?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think it's there are such a range of wonderful accelerators out there today of all stripes and colors. And I think it can be incredibly lonely starting a business. I think it's very, very helpful to be in a small community of like-minded people. And most of these accelerators offer up tremendous learning experiences and opportunity to hear those who are more experienced or other investors. So I think without doubt, if one is at a very early stage, joining an accelerator, some are some are more time intensive than others, and you have to find one that seems to best fit your bandwidth, and hopefully we'll start to be able to also meet in person, but absolutely recommended. Absolutely recommended. Look, I think some general tips. I know you wanted to sort of talk about that. Look, selection of co-founders, I think, is a very important decision early on, and one that, and I will say I have some experience with this myself, that you got to give real thought and serious consideration to selection of your co-founders. Often entrepreneurs starting out don't do that enough, and it can be, even if one's known, these are people you went to high school with, or were in your college fraternity, sorority. Very important to understand what each co-founder contributes to the team. And inevitably, there will be disagreements that arise, and much better to sort of talk about this up front as to how one will work through those disagreements. And it's just often, I think, entrepreneurs come together because they almost sort of stumble and find each other as opposed to really give thought to it. And so I think that's an important very important, because I think otherwise it can wind up tripping you up at a very, very important time. And I think it's something that investors like ours look at very closely, who those co-founders are, what's the division of responsibility, and how do they relate to each other.
And I've had experience with this issue too, and I just underscore how important that is. And you know, I mean, it's real world stuff. You know, you want to have good lawyers help you draw up, you know, plans so you count for worst cases, because things
Yes.
do happen in the
Yes.
world. And you know, yeah.
The other thing is,
So
even early on, as you take on small investors, individual angel investors, make sure there are people that you enjoy, work from, or can learn something from. And if there are signals that go up for you, if there's anybody who's sort of a bully during that process of getting to know you, rest assured, when things don't go the way they should, and things rarely go the way you think up front, it will become quite problematic. You're, as much as investors are evaluating entrepreneurs need to assess investors. Doesn't mean, and as one of our very successful entrepreneurs who recently, last year, did an IPO said, doesn't mean you will have to take money from people you don't like. But if there are sort of concerns you're having about sort of treatment, you should be very cautious and or seek the advice of somebody who's had more experience going through this. I think at the same time, you should treat all your investors with a great deal of respect and communicate regularly with them. And again, as an entrepreneur in a startup stage, your scarcest resource is actually not money. Your scarcest resource is time. So, but I would say, particularly in the world in which we're operating, there should be some communication that goes out to your investor group twice a year that sort of talks to the progress you've made, the challenges you've encountered, and what you're doing or have done or are doing to sort of negotiate around them. Want to be watchful sometimes, I think, of what you disclose in terms of numbers, because an investor who gives you $1 million deserves a lot more access than an investor who gives you 25,000. But important, and our best entrepreneurs have mastered this communication and do it very time efficiently. And our weaker entrepreneurs still do not understand. No matter, I've done my best to communicate that your investors are key, and they will ultimately, investors and satisfied customers will be your key to getting to the next stage, candidly. So, and then I would just throw out one more thing, David, is by the point at which you progress from individual investors to funds, even seed funds, probably at the first stage, seed funds or smaller funds, be sure you're targeting funds that from whom you have a remote chance of getting money. And all funds have on their website their investment criteria, which usually speak to geography, they speak to domain, they speak to amount of traction. And I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs approach us, who are essentially pre-revenue or in Europe or don't have one woman on their senior leadership team. And I think, what, kind of, haven't you read our website? It's pretty easy to do. And one shouldn't gloat and feel that you're likely to be the exception, because most probably you will not be the exception. And what you're doing is squandering your scarce time.
And often the funds may have, agreements with their investors, their LPs, what they have to invest in,
Yes.
perhaps. So, it's not,
Yes.
Don't waste your time. Going back to that angel investor point, I think it can be really tempting, and I've again experienced this too myself.
Yeah.
When you're running low on money personally, it's tough to be an entrepreneur. You have to, figure out a way to pay rent next month and everything for your
Right.
apartment, let alone an office. To just take money, an investor may want 50% of your company for, some wildly crazy term, and you take it, and then you find out they're just, not, they cause all sorts of problems because they're not a great fit. Can you talk a little bit about that balance? How you can be picky.
You shouldn't be giving away 50% of your company to anybody. And
right.
You just some money is just not worth taking. And if that's the only
Right.
money that that you're being offered, this is like the mafia.
Right.
So, you gotta go get a job or go work for
Yeah.
somebody else. So the challenge of the investor entrepreneur relationship is it's one that can't rarely be unwound. There's sort of no divorce. You're signing on to a marriage that will be for eternity until there's some end event, positive or negative, for the company. So it may not be comfortable. We've all been there. And when in doubt, seek out an entrepreneur who's kind of further along than you, or an experienced investor, to sort of talk about the situation. So that's what I would best counsel, because it does get emotional. It just does. Money, it gets to be, it can be very emotional and stressful when you're trying to sort of raise money and don't have a hell of a lot of time, and there are not that many options. So
Being an entrepreneur is tough. It's not all the glory stories and the IPOs.
no, it's more often than not, which is why you have to really like and believe in what you're doing, because the travails are really very real, and most days there will be challenges that you never kind of foresaw. It's inherently that resilience and grit, or characteristics that get bandied around a lot, but it's because they're really very valid and very necessary.
And not to get folks too dissuaded or depressed, let's assume the good picture here. You have built out a great, founding team with a diverse team, gender inclusive, and you've gotten some traction, and you're growing, and you're at the right stage to pitch you. What's the best way to get on your radar screen?
Well, if you've done all those things, look, and most of the folks in the audience will have heard this before. To the extent you have a warm intro, that is, somebody that knows us, and what you may not know is, how much we kind of respect that person. But if there's a warm intro that can be gotten, that's always good. So, because it becomes another endorsement. But failing that, I mean, we do we do very seriously look at anything that comes in our door over the transom without an introduction that meets our criteria. And we're happy to talk to any entrepreneur that meets those criteria, and we don't slough anybody off unless it's in a domain that we have no experience in. So things like biotech, we can't possibly. Well, we're generalists. We have 3 large buckets that we try to kind of put as part of our screening device. The truth is, it's more what we don't invest in, and things like biotech, or we just don't have the team expertise to significantly add value beyond capital. So we'll refrain from that. But anything comes in the door. But I think, a 1-paragraph note that shows you understand what we're looking for, and some demonstration that in fact the company meets those thresholds is pretty pivotal. And if you do, we're happy. We'd love to learn more, and getting an executive summary or PowerPoint that adds beyond what the intro paragraph over email will tell us. But rest assured, we take all that very seriously, and we really do respect entrepreneurs, because we know that sometimes venture capitalists don't. And if you send an inquiry to us, you're going to get a response.
That's awesome. And maybe we all wish we'd invested in Moderna, but other than that, biotech is a whole separate world. In terms of then once people have gotten your attention, that sort of process, how many companies are you investing in a year, and how long have you seen across Fund 1 and 2 the typical processes from first contact to cutting the check, or EFT?
All right, well, I'll start with that. Look, we very much appreciate that every hour the entrepreneur spends with us, they're not building their business on an operational level. They're not. So we, I think over time, that's been one of the learnings for us, is we tightened our diligence. We have cut checks in as little as sort of a 4-week period, probably more typically over a 2 to 3 month period. But we are very cognizant of the demands we put on entrepreneurs. And, we spend a lot of that time outside the company, validating the market, talking to other investors, talking to their customers. So to try to limit, and be respectful of the constraints on the entrepreneur's time. What was the other part of the question? Time, and what was
looking at like the companies you've invested in, so what that process has been in time.
Oh, okay. Our process is really not any different than other venture funds. I'll tell you a couple of things that do stand out that impress us, one favorably or unfavorably. So forecasts. First of all we know about forecasts is they're wrong. I mean, it's just inherent. But what we're most interested in is what the entrepreneur and the team's thinking is behind those forecasts. Do they understand, the key assumptions? What are key assumptions? Why are they making them? And do they understand how they relate, certain metrics relate to the ability to scale the business? And I can tell you, many startup entrepreneurs don't adequately, and you get better over time. But the more, that will impress venture capitalists, is the extent you take command of the numbers, and just hyperbole, not interested in hyperbole, but interested in, kind of where you are today, what you've learned, what are the key levers to pull to develop this business, and got to be very articulate about those. I think the other bugaboo for me is this issue of customer pipeline. For us, that's a very important thing, is looking at the customers that you have reached, you're trying to reach. But, too often startup entrepreneurs say, well, here's here's $25 million worth of pipeline. Yeah, that's 25. But where are you in terms of talking to each of those customers? And do you understand that your engagement of customers has to go through, a multi-pronged process here? And again, you'll get better at it over time, but some understanding that just because you have prospects for 25 million, your ability to realize those over the next years is a fraction of that. And it depends upon where you are for each individual company prospect, where you are in terms of stage of development. So I think those are two, and there's a lot more that can be kind of learned on the internet about each of those. But I think if one is to go beyond sort of startup through angel funding to ultimately a Series A, those are two important things to focus on. Certainly what we focus on as we evaluate prospective investments.
Well, that's great to hear for those of us who don't have the background like you do at Solomon Brothers and McKinsey.
Right.
When putting together those financials, it doesn't have to be, so much. We all know in the pandemic era, throw out your forecasts anyway, right? But it doesn't have to be accurate so much as showing your thinking, of course. But I have so many questions I could ask you, and before I monopolize the time here, I want to get to some of our great audience questions we have here. And, one is just so important. It's harder in the pandemic here. And an anonymous attendee asks, where do we find mentors like you, to help understand the nuances of finding and vetting investors? And, I'd say particularly during the pandemic, it's hard to find mentors, right?
I would actually argue it's probably easier because folks are home. And, I think in general, it's easier to get people's attention because we're not all on planes and, rushing hither and yonder. So don't use that. That's a little bit like I remember years ago, people say, don't look for a job over Christmas. Well, maybe that's the best time to look for a job, before and after Christmas holiday, because, people have a little more time. So look, I think there's lots of angel groups is I think a good place to go. And I would argue geographically, because I think ultimately it's great to develop relationships with mentors if you can, in the flesh, in real life. And certainly in the Burbank area, there are lots of wonderful sort of angel groups. Burbank, LA, I think good to be clear about what you're looking for. There's also lots of great events to go to that you can meet people. It's hard to just ask somebody to be a mentor without starting to develop sort of some fun, foundational relationship here. Because notwithstanding what I just said, most people feel too busy all the time. So you got to, I'm not doing a good enough job at answering this question. So I want to think about this. But I think there's lots of events to go to. I think there are angel groups, and those were, if I were a young entrepreneur today starting out, those are the circles that I would navigate.
Pasadena Angels is an active group that serves the region. We had their chair on a Zoom a few months ago. Yeah. It's
I'm sorry. No, and there are folks, I'll be honest here too, there are folks who are quote unquote retired or semi-retired, many of which are young, relatively young, because they've had a great deal of success and don't want a day job and don't want to be as busy as I am. And those are great people because they really can spend some time with you. So it depends what you're looking for. And sometimes it's better to pick off, if you would, individuals for specific pieces than trying to establish an overall mentee relationship.
And here's where I also pitch our partners. Be sure to get in touch, with the city's economic development team and also the Burbank Chamber. They know retired business people in the community, business leaders from other sectors, folks who may run not a tech startup, but boy, they've had some war stories to share, and some of it is a psychic help, especially maybe if you're a female founder dealing with discrimination in the industry still, or you're any founder dealing with just things, running you over. You feel like you're getting under the bus. It's really hard, without someone to cheer you on, and maybe also to tell you when you're got your blinders on, your idea is wrong. It needs to be revised. So it doesn't have to be a tech person, but check out burbankchamber.org and econdevburbank.com for the city. Don't be afraid to ask far and wide for help and referrals.
And if I could make a little shameless pitch, we have on our website, www.womensvcfund.com, little video clips of some major events, including one in Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland. They were panels of highly successful female founders. The goal of those was, the audience was, they were geared to, we asked those successful female founders to share the challenges, how they negotiated the challenges and opportunities of building and scaling their businesses. They were wonderful events where the response we got from the audience, which were 75 to 80 entrepreneurs, at most often at the seed and angel stage, was that they were getting guidance and learning things that they hadn't heard elsewhere. So we had to distill, our 90-minute sort of events into 5 minutes, but I think we distilled some incredible lessons, and well worth your time well worth your time.
Well, you have the links there in the chat to the Women's VC Fund website, and also the economic development resources for entrepreneurs. Of course, sort of ties in with our next audience question here from Laura. She asked, how does one find a good accelerator program? Well, click that Burbank link. You'll learn about the Tap Ventures in Burbank, Future Work Accelerator Studio. But more broadly speaking, what factors should one use to evaluate accelerators? There are a lot out there.
Well, it's a good question. I would talk to some of the recent grads who have come out of there and ask them, what they learned and what specific help they got. That's what I would do in terms of my diligence, in terms of assessing accelerators. And then I would look at what their program is. Who are they going to expose you to? Who are they going to bring in terms of successful entrepreneurs, experienced investors? So it's a little bit like taking a mini college course here. and who your compatriots would be. You may learn as much from your peer group as you do from the experts. But today there's just a plethora, and some of them have gone virtual. I did a little session for a group out of, I don't want to get out of the LA geography, and I will tell you, I consider the greater LA is my second home. So, but recently, not that long ago, last month, did a session for all female founder accelerator that's now virtual out of Northern California. So, but I'm going to also say this. I myself would not go into an all-female founder accelerator. I do believe that diversity is critical. And I believe that we produce the best teams that build the strongest companies when we have that diversity. So I'm a little bit loath to these all-female peer groups, these all-female accelerators. At the same token, I'm going to make a call out, shout out to the men in the audience who are entrepreneurs. You need to bring senior women in on your teams. And trust me, they're going to work harder and they're going to be an incredible investment. So I think hopefully we're going to wind up soon that we really have lots of mixed gender, mixed racial teams. And that's how we are going to uncover the best opportunities and build the highest performing companies, in my opinion.
That really, I want to echo that. All of us in the ecosystem have to do everything we can to make it, the ecosystem it should be. I mean, we like to talk in, Silicon Valley more broadly, not geographically, but in the tech world, about changing the world. I mean, how can we try to change the world if we're not getting our own world right? And certainly, not only for female founders, for Black founders, for all manner, of people, we all really need to step up and, as you say, not just talk, but do, put these things into action to make it more, a more equitable, more, fair and ecosystem, but also, from the monetary interests on the VC hat, because that's where the opportunities get realized, right?
Yeah. No, this is not a nice thing to do. This is the thing we should be doing if we want to really build value and harness creativity. And and those that don't are going to get left behind. I mean, I truly think we're approaching that stage where it's absolutely necessary. It's no longer negotiable or discretionary.
We're at the lightning round here of questions. We're running a little short on time. I'm going to kind of ask the two remaining we have at once, and you can jump in with quick answers. Ramel Carter asked, she is a Black female solopreneur and is looking for funding and media credentials for a media startup. What advice do you have for folks, perhaps really early on vetting their idea, building out their team? What resources are there? Books? Are there blogs? Should people be looking at? And then secondly, if you're later stage, where do you find good board members? Or maybe that's also early stage when you're building out your team of advisors.
Well, I think there's a tremendous amount of other books. Yeah, there's some books. I'm looking at my bookshelf. But today there are so many resources online. Simply, if you would Google the issue or issues that you have, and in fact, coming out of the pandemic, there's more kind of webinars, webcasts, podcasts online that you can access than ever, and it's phenomenal. With highly experienced venture capitalists, highly experienced entrepreneurs. So it's almost like an embarrassment of resources that are available at no cost, virtually no cost to sort of entrepreneurs. So board members, look, I'd be very cautious about board members early on. I think you want perhaps an advisor or two, but board members usually don't come till you start to raise money. And the early board members well, the board members of companies, early stage companies, all the way through, until maybe you get to Series B or C, are the people who put in the real money to your company. So I think you're first looking for the money, and who can contribute beyond capital to decide whether in fact they would make a good board member. But again, you don't want to go there too quickly. You want to be a little cautious to think about bringing them as an advisor. It gives you a lot more degrees of freedom to get to know each other.
Well, speaking, we are just about out of time. Speaking of board members, I just want to thank the board chair of the Burbank Chamber, Steve, Jamie, wonderful head, the staff there, and of course Chris and everyone at the Burbank Chamber. I want to thank Mary, Marissa, Erica, and their bosses in community development and the council at the city of Burbank for putting these events on and making this happen. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much to all of you, the audience, and of course to our incredible speaker here. We, look forward to having a follow-up someday where we can have a reception afterwards, and maybe some of those food tech startups you invested in, catering. But for now, certainly our virtual applause, from all of us. This has been a great discussion. I just want to call on everyone in the ecosystem. Let's do what we can to make it a better ecosystem. Lift up female founders, board members, institutional LPs. Put pressure on them to make the changes we want to see happen. Action, not talk. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it unlocks financial opportunity. And any closing words?
No, I think it's very exciting to be an entrepreneur. I think we are going to enter an incredible period of growth. And I think if you have a good idea and execute on it, the truth is there's a lot of good ideas. There's no shortage of good ideas, and there's relatively few ideas that are truly novel. However, it's all about the execution. And, that's why we pay as much attention as we do to the team, and I encourage you to select your co-founders and bring in your core team so that you can run full speed ahead smartly.
Great advice, and we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We're rooting for you, with your startup. Grow big, and don't forget to pitch Women's VC Fund 2 if you have the right mix. If you don't have the right mix of team, diversify so you qualify. And good luck out there.
Okay. Best of luck, everybody. Thanks so much, David. Thanks for
take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay.